A multi-million-dollar tunnel now carves through a rugged mountain pass in Kyrgyzstan, a marvel of engineering and a lifeline funded entirely by Beijing. It has shaved hours off local trade routes and revived surrounding villages. Yet the local sentiment is not one of simple gratitude. A pervasive whisper suggests the tunnel was not built for commerce, but designed with specific dimensions to accommodate Chinese tanks. This deep-seated suspicion manifests in frantic warnings about foreign men stealing local wives, despite official reports showing only a handful of such marriages. It is a surreal friction, a region physically and economically rebuilt by a benefactor it remains fundamentally terrified of. In Turkmenistan, this dynamic reaches an extreme where nearly 94% of exports are destined for China. On paper, the economy is effectively owned by Beijing. For years, observers anticipated a formal military entrance to protect these massive investments. But the reality is more tactical. After witnessing their troops targeted in other regions, China opted to move away from putting its own boots on the ground. In Tajikistan, they have established a discrete base for the People's Armed Police, while elsewhere, they fund local governments to build entire brigades specifically to guard Chinese assets. Central Asia has become a high-stakes laboratory for a new kind of quiet hegemony, a blueprint involving economic capture and outsourced security that is intended for rollout across Africa and the developing world within the next 3 years. The necessity of a traditional military invasion becomes secondary when the infrastructure of control is already in place. While rumors of tanks persist in tea houses, the physical reality on the ground, the asphalt, the steel, and the logistics, reflects a boom rather than an occupation. This creates a profound cognitive dissonance between visceral public anxiety and record-breaking efficiency. This shift is best understood through state capacity, a government's actual ability to execute policy, build infrastructure, and hit trade targets. For decades, Central Asia struggled with procedural governance, countless meetings and paperwork with very little physical progress. Beijing is now exporting its own brand of hyper-competence, proving it can secure its interests not through coercion, but through the sheer administrative and engineering gravity of its presence. Almas has spent 20 years in the cab of a Kamaz truck, his life once defined by the treacherous, crumbling passes of the Tian Shan Mountains. For 2 decades, his existence was a series of long waits, waiting for underfunded crews to clear mudslides or waiting 48 hours at checkpoints to pay bribes for a manifest stamp. He viewed the road as an adversary to be survived. When the new Chinese-funded logistics corridor opened, the change felt like a physical relief. Driving on asphalt as smooth as glass, Elmas now navigates automated way stations where sensors replace the corrupt official with a clipboard. His transit time has been cut in half. For a man like Elmas, state capacity is not an academic concept. It is the quiet, slightly unsettling realization that he now gets home to his family on Friday night instead of Sunday morning. He feels a lingering loyalty to the old ways, but he cannot argue with the efficiency that has finally made the road serve him. This individual experience is backed by seismic data. Trade between China and Central Asia reached a record $106.3 billion in 2025, a 12% increase from the previous year. Chinese imports now account for 60% of the region's total trade turnover, making Beijing the main character in the regional economy. Furthermore, the Eurasian Development Bank estimates an additional $40 billion in untapped trade potential remains, held back only by the speed of infrastructure development. This demand is a dam ready to burst, driving the aggressive pace of new projects. These projects are fundamentally changing the geometry of the continent. The China-Kyrgyzstan-Uzbekistan Railway, often called the Road of Life, breaks the historical Soviet-era axis where all rails pointed north toward Moscow. This new east-west line slices through a nightmare of terrain, requiring 486 kilometers of track, 81 bridges, and 41 tunnels. Over 120 kilometers of the route exists entirely underground. The sheer scale of moving that much earth with around-the-clock boring machines projects an immense, almost military capacity. For Beijing, the calculus is supply chain velocity. This route saves 7 to 8 days of shipping time compared to the Russian route, transforming Kyrgyzstan from a landlocked deadlock into a central commercial hub. The strategy also includes the creation of integrated systems, like the Korgos Gateway on the Kazakh-Chinese border. Located at the point furthest from any ocean, this dry port functions as a massive rail-to-rail transfer hub. Because Chinese tracks use standard gauge and former Soviet territories use a wider gauge, every container must be mechanically lifted and moved to a new wagon. Korgos has turned this potential bottleneck into a high-efficiency machine, increasing trade volumes by over 115%. The containers no longer carry just cheap textiles, but high-tech industrial goods, electric vehicles, lithium batteries, and solar products. A BYD factory in the Jizak region of Uzbekistan now produces 50,000 EVs a year using Chinese robotic systems, representing a complete technology and ecosystem transfer. Security for these assets is handled with equal precision. To avoid the image of an invader, China outsources the risk and the potential resentment. Batur, a security coordinator in Turkmenistan, stands guard over miles of gas pipes and valves. Though his salary is paid by the Chinese project budget, his uniform is Turkmen. He is a local man who speaks the local language, diffusing tensions that a foreign soldier would only inflame. Batur feels a complex pride. He knows he is protecting his country's economic lifeline, even if the destination of that lifeline is Beijing. He views himself not as a guard for an occupier, but as a partner in protection. This model utilizes private security companies like the Zanjun Junhong Group, which recruit veterans to train local forces rather than engaging in frontline combat. They employ a form of legal jujitsu, adapting perfectly to local restrictions. In Kyrgyzstan, they operate more openly, while in Kazakhstan, where foreign armed groups are banned, firms like Frontier Services Group register as logistics and consulting companies. They achieve the same objective, securing the asset, without the political friction of a visible foreign military presence. This physical security is reinforced by the digital Silk Road. AI-enabled surveillance, facial recognition, and safe city projects provide local governments with the seductive power of predictive analysis, the ability to identify potential unrest before it begins. China provides the cameras, the software, and the training, ensuring that local law enforcement protects Chinese interests using Chinese tools. Behind every local guard, like Batur, is a Chinese-trained supervisor and an AI camera system, all operating within a legal framework China helped navigate. The engine of this entire machine is inevitable economic gravity. In Ashgabat, entrepreneurs like Selmi look at export charts showing 94% of natural gas flowing east to China. For her, the great game of European empires is a dead history lesson. Her reality is a contract written in Mandarin. She does not see this as a loss of independence, but as the resurgence of Eastern civilizational power. Having studied in Shanghai, she views the West as distant and moralizing, while China is present with a market and a checkbook. The Central Asia-China gas pipeline physically binds the region to China's energy grid through a marriage of infrastructure. Lines A, B, and C are operational, with line D in development, traversing Uzbekistan and Kazakhstan. You cannot easily switch partners when the steel pipes only go one way. While Russia historically acted as the security guarantor, its influence has diminished post-Ukraine, leaving a vacuum that China has filled. The 2023 Xi'an summit institutionalized this new order, establishing a permanent diplomatic secretariat. The soft power of this integration is seen in the thousands of Central Asian students opting for Shanghai over London or Moscow. They are adopting Chinese technical and engineering standards. When these engineers return home to build bridges or 5G networks, they use Chinese systems they were trained on, creating a long-term technological lock-in. The elites and the business class have embraced this transactional relationship because it lacks the political conditions often attached to Western aid. China has rewritten the rules of being a superpower by prioritizing trade and infrastructure, supported by security that feels local. The economic and infrastructure links are now stronger than steel. While the echoes of Sinophobia remain, they are being eroded by the sheer utility of the relationship. China has effectively integrated an entire region using concrete, contracts, and cameras without firing a single shot. The most significant shift in global power is not the sound of tanks, but the silence of an efficiency so total that the takeover is barely noticed as it happens.